I wanted to start with a hello to you, to those of you that might be listening to this video, and how you're doing. Right now there is a pretty big transition that we're in on planet Earth. And there's so many different layers to that transition, but I just want to say hello to the death process that I think a lot of us may be feeling. We might be feeling this death process for a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons is that it's normal in when we change creative cycles. As we change and go through creative cycles, it's normal to have a death process. You know, People with a uterus, fallopian tubes, and ovaries, those female reproductive organs, people that menstruate, every single month there is a cycle that happens in their body, that allows a death process to occur. And within that death process, there's a mini ego death that occurs, releasing, releasing, integrating, letting go of behavior, of our beliefs, of things that we have outgrown that are no longer serving us on our path and what we're creating. And we let it go so that we can release, renew, and realign with the next creative cycle, so that we can unplug from an old cycle and replug into a new cycle. And we can say that there's another layer of this happening in the Northern Hemisphere simply because it's winter time. And as we approach winter time, it's a natural time you see in nature for things to go into a state of dormancy, calling us to go within, coming into more stillness. The days get shorter. There's a natural hibernation that takes place. We want to sleep more. We want to sleep in later. We want to do less. We're less active. Okay, and winter is a natural time to go through a reflection process, but we also have these retrogrades. We have Mars, Jupiter, Uranus, and still Mercury in retrograde, and Chiron. So things are in retrograde that are also kind of, whether we want to move forward or not, whether we want to expand right now, we're in some ways being held, being held to go within, to go internally, to reflect, to digest, to rework some things, reevaluate some things, and even turn our attention to things that need our attention that maybe didn't realize needed our attention. But I also want to talk about just the collective right now and some of the energies in the air right now collectively. And I think with Pluto moving into Aquarius, we're sensing a grieving on a collective level. We're sensing a death experience on a collective level. We're leaving behind an old world officially, and we're stepping into a new world. And there's a lot of grieving about that old world. There was a comfort zone in that old world. There was a predictability in that old world. And now that old world we're not going back to it. It's changing. At the same time, we are having some major power shifts on the planet with a new president of the United States in a transition, coming into office. And there is a lot of, division on this. A lot of people questioning the way they relate and connect to each other. A lot of people a lot of people felt that they knew their friends, that they knew their community members, that they were aware of people's beliefs, values, that we cared about each other. And then through this kind of shifting that's happened on Earth, there's there's an exposure, there's a revealing that's happened. And that's kind of what happens in an apocalypse, is that there is revealing. There's lots of revealing that happens. What used to be veiled gets exposed. I think there's a lot of fear about what's been exposed. I think there's a lot of betrayal around what's been exposed. I think people are looking at each other differently right now. Lots of different perspectives, lots of different opinions, lots of different ways of looking at the overall issues happening and how to address it, and all the details of what we must go through to go through change and how to address that. What might seem like an overall good solution could be horrible for the experience in the details. What could work for us more, bring more comfort for us in all the details, could be really limiting us overall, as we seek some form of positive or optimistic or innovative change, on the planet. And this is where there has been tension, over the last month. A lot of deep reflection for each of us. And not even just collectively, but also personally. I think a lot of people are looking at and getting a very sobering perspective of where they are now in their lives. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's sobering. It might feel like challenging for some of us. It might feel like a hardship for some of us. But nonetheless, it's sobering for a reason. It allows you to get more grounded into reality so that you can really reflect, reevaluate, realign, rework what you need to, so that you can move forward in a direction that is better for you overall. The reason why I'm mentioning all of this is that there's a full moon in Gemini coming up. There's a full moon in Gemini, and Gemini is an energy that is intellectual. It can be very social and chatty, and it can be very well informed about all the things, all the things, like different topics, different subjects, anything from knowing about the neighbors, knowing about, the community, knowing about the family, the friends, the relatives, knowing a little bit about everything, socially speaking, knowing the gossip, knowing what's going on in each other's worlds, but also just being informed a little bit, about science, about all the different topics out there. There's something about Gemini that can be, in a beautiful way, like exposed to a whole layer of information, that helps us all navigate our relationships and how we socialize, how we connect, and how we communicate with one another. Gemini is so skilled at that. They're so skilled at socializing, being able to meet someone from a totally different walk of life and have a conversation, be able to have a connection of sorts, have a communication of sorts. So Gemini does have a skill, very skilled in embracing the dualistic nature of life, of each other, the complexities of our human social nature, and our ability to meet each person and adapt to how we might connect with connect and communicate with one another. Gemini also, because of this skill, because of this talent, is, well known for expressing that talent through things like sales and marketing and networking and social media and, all different forms of communication, anything from verbal communication to written communication to, writing writing online, communicating online, like all the ways we can connect on the phone, using a device, all the ways. One of the one of the things that I'm sensing overall about this full moon is that it's helping us to have a type of break and release. Going back to the theme about winter or death or just reflection or just taking a break. This is a time where I really sense us slowing down and taking a break, um, because we have a long journey ahead of us and because there's a lot of change ahead of us and there's some big shifts that we're preparing for ahead of us. And sometimes right before a big expansion, there's a contraction and there's, a slowdown, and it might even feel like we're going backwards. Sound familiar? Um, it might feel like things are getting even more limited before we have an expansion. And so I just want to talk about how Gemini is about to have a pretty big expansion. I mean, we have Jupiter in Gemini, but right now Jupiter is retrograde. And so there's more of this deep internal reflection going on in our intellect, and socially, and even maybe in our technology and our transit and our ways of communicating. They're not exactly going in an outward expansion right now. But Jupiter will eventually turn direct sometime in February, and I believe sometime in February. I'll have to double check that. But we also have Jupiter leaving Gemini in June. And then right after Jupiter leaves Gemini in June, in July, Uranus will move into Gemini. Now that's a big shift in energies, a big shift. Uranus and Taurus has brought a lot of change, but it's done that in very Taurus-like qualities, about our finances, our security, our foundations, our homes, and sometimes those changes do happen abruptly, but they also can happen in very gradual, slow ways, like Taurus. With Uranus moving into Gemini, we're going to see very fast change because Gemini is very fast. You you listen to someone that has heavy Gemini placements and they can talk fast, they can think fast, they can process fast. They're very up in their heads. Da, 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 da. And with Uranus there, I do think there's going to be some very innovative thinking, some very genius-like thinking, some very ahead of our time kind of thinking. I think there's going to be a lot of things happening all at once that are changing and going through changes. And I think we're just seeing some major changes with technology, and with our transit systems, as well as the way we connect. And I think this is where we're really going to see a shift, where, let's say before 2020, before COVID happened, before the pandemic, it was more common for us to leave home and go to work, go to a physical building outside of our home and go to work. Then the pandemic happened, COVID happened, we had a shift. And one of the things that happened in those shifts was we started working from home and we started to really normalize remote jobs. And that allowed people to work from home, to work in a comfortable space, to not have to transit, and it also allowed people the freedom to be more nomadic, to move to different locations that maybe they wouldn't have been able to move to before, and maybe even just travel more. And that was a permanent shift, and we really haven't gone fully back to the way things used to be, and we're not going to. So with Uranus going into Gemini, one of the things I'm sensing is another shift around the way we all connect and communicate and network with one another. And instead of it being more one-on-one, um, or just online, having access to, all kinds of communication online, I think in some way it's going to be a lot more interconnected. And so one of the first things that came to me when I was sensing into this was how virtual reality would become more normalized, where instead of living in the physical world, we start to live more in a virtual world. And how our relationships could go through a big change in this, because when you're living in a virtual world, you're no longer have to show up as you can show up as any avatar that you want to be. You could be a giraffe, you could be a robot, you could be a monster, you could be a person, you could, describe yourself like you are. You could show up completely different. You could change your voice, you could change your language, you could change all different ways that you show up in the world. You can be very changeable. You can update it. One day you could be this person, the next day that person. And how is that? How is that going to change the way we connect with each other and relate to each other? It's very expressive. It's very adaptable. It's very weird. It's very unique. It's very different, and it's very fluid. We've seen a huge movement happen over the last few years, whether you like it or not, whether you judge it or not, whether you embrace it or not, but fluidity with our relationships and the way we express ourselves in these relationships, non-binary, being fluid, polyamorous, like there's relationships can be completely customized at this point, and same with how you show up, as a person. You can present yourself this way, you can present yourself that way. There's so many ways in which we can express ourselves, right? So I think this shift with Uranus in Gemini is going to alter the way we relate to each other, the way we socialize, the way we connect, the way we network. And I think one of those things happens through virtual reality, and that becoming more normalized, and just our virtual self becoming more of a dominant presentation in our lives towards each other versus our physical self. Um, these are not things that I necessarily support or feel good about or believe in. I'm just kind of reporting the energy that I'm sensing about all this. I'm sure there's a reason why there's a big grieving process happening on the planet right now, and I think that the way that we've been interacting with each other is an old earth kind of experience, and there was obviously beauty to that. There was a way of that serving us, so to leave it behind and to go into a new way of relating to each other, in some ways exciting, venturing into the unknown, gives us a lot of freedom and adaptability and customization, but at the same time it can not replace, the original ways we used to communicate and connect with one another. It's just like the grieving process you can feel if you were living out in nature, for 20 or 30 years, and then suddenly you moved to the city and you lived in a building, so it's just different. Um, so I sense that about Uranus going into Gemini. I think the way we communicate is going to be completely transformed. We're going to have Pluto trining Uranus for a while in Gemini. And, Uranus stays in Gemini for, I actually don't know exactly the year it leaves, but in general, Uranus is usually in a sign for about 8 years. So it's a long transit, is what I'm trying to say. It's not just over in a year. So it's a pretty big shift. Things are going to be changing a lot faster. There's going to be a lot of transitions, a lot of catching up, a lot of overwhelm around all the ways that we can connect and communicate and learn and grow and expand. With that said, this full moon reminds me of the contraction or the slowdown or the withdrawal or the death that happens before the rebirth in Gemini. I don't sense it as a negative experience, this full moon in Gemini. Actually, with the full moon conjunct Jupiter, there's a wide conjunction here. The full moon might feel very positive and optimistic and light and, kind of abundant in some ways, just like, but with Jupiter retrograde, I definitely sense this feeling of really taking a break and reflecting, a deep reflection period, a quiet time for ourselves, for the very active Gemini energy. This feels very slow, this full moon. It feels very slow for some reason. Like when I was starting to feel into the energy of this full moon, it was like I was about to fall asleep. It was so lethargic feeling and so slow feeling. So something about this full moon is asking us to like really let something go, and slow down and reflect. So, this full moon is at the 23rd degree in the last decan of Gemini, which gives us more of a fixed energy for Gemini. This would be the type of Gemini energy that's a little bit more steady, a little bit more fixed in their thinking and in the way they operate. A little less adaptable, a little bit more straightforward. We're going in this direction, and I think it's fitting for what's ahead, with the change of Uranus coming into Gemini and the expansion that's already happening with Gemini, with Jupiter there. So I think there's definitely a trajectory that we're on. It's like we've definitely allowed a shift on the earth again, and we're not going back. And things are going to move forward. And one of the things that is going to completely transform and change the planet is technology. And this is kind of the winter before that happens. It's the spaciousness to deeply reflect and let go and grieve before another big change happens on Earth. And so that's what I sense about this full moon. Um, let's explore the chart a little bit here. Like I mentioned, overall, this full moon has a very positive feeling to it. It's bright, it's sunny, it's optimistic, it's got that Jupiter energy to it, but it's very internal. And what is internal is this kind of releasing that we're doing around this full moon. There can be an unconsciousness that I think is coming out. We have a square with Neptune, and Neptune is direct in Pisces. And I just think we're not clear on some things in our lives. I think we're not clear at all about some things in our lives. Um, and we're not clear, but we're also sensitive. We're sensitive. Um, and there's a need to have a release. This full moon is in a sextile to Eris and Hygeia. Hygeia is the goddess of miraculous healing, and then we've got Eris, the feminine goddess of chaos, and discord. And then we have Chiron even in this sextile too, the wounded healer. So whatever is in our way, maybe there's something in our way around who we are as individuals that again has to go through a type of release. And one of the hints here is that, we have a trine here with Lilith and Vesta. Vesta is like this guardian of the sacred flame, and there could be something sacred or important about this release that happens at this time. Lilith, is a dark goddess that knows how to find the hidden things within us, the hidden wounds within us, and take our power back from that. This full moon definitely wants to support our relationships. I mean, there's this trine to Lilith and Vesta in Libra. I mean, this full moon is helping us to support our relationships by giving us a type of release. And there's just something not clear um, with this square to Neptune. And what I'm sensing is that we might feel pulled in a lot of different directions, kind of like that Seven of Cups energy in the tarot, where you could have like a lot of choices, a lot of decisions, but you're not quite sure what's behind the door, like what's behind that option or that decision or that choice. And I feel the tension or the challenge of wanting to make a choice or wanting to commit to something, but like really not sure how to approach it or not sure what to do. And with Mars in retrograde and some other planets in retrograde, I'd say it's not the worst time to just wait and pause and just reflect and think. Like, we've got the sun in Sagittarius opposing the moon. It's a full moon. The sun always opposes the moon. That energy of Sagittarius, it loves to be spontaneous and, just kind of get up and kind of it has its own adaptable nature too, and it can be in some ways like chaotic, like Gemini, like in that it can go in a lot of different directions at once. It can hop over here and then over there and then over here and then over there. It can be very adaptable in its actions. Um, but we still have a square here. We have a square with Neptune. Neptune is squaring. It's in a T square with the sun and the moon. So something's unclear, and it's hard to take action on things. It's hard to maneuver and adapt and transition and weave in and out of a situation and move forward in a situation when you're not totally clear where you're going, what you're doing, what choice to make. um I do think, though, the benefit to this is that through our experiences, through our deep reflection, we do get more clarity, and we it's kind of like that's the key to opening the door of clarity is go deep within and reflect, or pause and wait, or slow down and retry some things. Like, I feel like that's the key to opening the door, and I think we're sensitive actually right now at this time, to explore more of our inner world, our inner minds, and um, get clarity that way. There is an inconjunct here with Uranus, which I think is interesting. I think it has to do with change, how we approach change. And there could be that side to us that just is like, I need a change. I feel bored. Like, I feel bored. I feel like I feel stifled, maybe not free, and I need to make change happen. And I just want to do all these things at once and, make that change happen. And then we've got, Uranus and Taurus, which is a little bit more like, hold up, let's make sure we're doing this in a secure and steady, reliable way. I can sense the blind spot here of needing to approach change in a more grounded way, possibly to just to be willing to slow down, instead of speed up, even if you have the passion or the energy or just the inspiration to get a bunch of things going at this time. Like, I think there's some blind spots around slowing down, like, um, where we actually need to take the slower approach, maybe. Um, I'm also saying that because, Saturn is squaring Jupiter. It was squaring the new moon in Sagittarius, and it's still squaring Jupiter. Um, and so there's something restricting, going on with what's expanding. There's something that is like, hold on, you can't cut corners. You gotta come back here and look at this. We need to review this. We need to, rein it in here. You can't just go out and go expand all of a sudden. We need to, do this in a disciplined way. We need to do this so that it works for us long term. We have a trine with Juno here in Scorpio, and so this is kind of like, oh, we've got some relationships involved in this. We've got our long-term partnerships and relationships we need to think about, as we're moving forward. And there's a restriction of, it's like putting on the brake pedal a little bit, slowing down, looking at the long term, you know, um, making sure that we do this in a way that is going to be realistic for our long-term relationships as well. But this moon in Gemini is ruled by Mercury. So Mercury's still going to be retrograde. I believe it's going to be turning direct or stationing um pretty soon after this full moon. Like, I think the next day, like December 15th ish. Um so yeah, I mean, we're still in a retrograde here, and we have a trine with the North Node, and we have a trine with Mars. So I think when we slow down and we process, I think we could get some very creative ideas with Mars being in Leo, and Mercury going retrograde in Sagittarius. I think I think we could get some really good big picture kind of imagination, kind of communication at this time. Um Not necessarily imagination, I didn't mean to say that, but like creative thinking, like, I think that's possible. That helps us approach a new direction that we're going in, getting creative, getting philosophical, looking at our beliefs, looking at how we can approach things creatively, looking how we can assert ourselves in a new creative direction, where we can take the lead in our lives in a new way, where we can, show up and assert ourselves differently in relationships. Um, Even when we look at Mars, we have this trine here with the North Node and Mercury, but we also have this opposition with Pluto and Ceres, Venus, and this just is very much like this power and control stuff in the air. And the thing about this tension within us is that there could be a side of us that is wants to be more direct, wants to be more fast, direct, and like obvious, demonstrative about the way we approach something, and then we have Pluto, which is, yeah, he doesn't have to approach things in a fast way. Pluto likes to be very deep, maybe even strategic. and like is very patient and slow with the evolutionary process. It wants to do things in a deep way, and I feel like these are two different energies that need to work together, but they have a hard time working together. In some ways they work well together and they don't. Like Pluto likes Mars because it can kind of move through fear and challenges and, you know, destroy things if needed. Like Pluto does involve destruction. It does because it is a master of death and rebirth, and so a part of death is destruction. So it does like Mars. It helps it with that destruction. But it can sometimes have some beef with Mars. And in this case, this is where we're seeing the beef with Mars. It's like you're approaching this too directly, you're approaching it too fast, you need to slow down, you need to be more you we can do this like, ripping off a band-aid, or we can do this like in a very deep way. We can do this through being direct, or we can allow ourselves to go through an evolution. And I think this is where we're caught up within ourselves. We might have a matter, depending on your own personal chart, where you have Leo in your chart, where you have Aquarius in your chart. You could have a sense of this kind of balancing that you're doing, um, between like approaching something very fast and direct, or having to reassess the way you approach something, and at the same time, that part of you that knows that this is something big. This is bigger. This is a bigger journey, and it's not just going to necessarily come together in one day. It's going to come together over years. And there's an evolution to it. So, and quite literally, there could just be anger, around the holidays. There could just be anger issues, you know, within our social dynamics. There could just be where we're meeting up with friends and family and socializing, and we're going through a grieving process and we mismanage our anger and we have a battle of wills, or, like that could happen too. That's there. And especially with Venus there in this opposition, it does bring some union to the mix. It could bring some passion, some care, some love, some heart to the mix. So it's not as thick or heavy at this time. There could, yes, be tension. At the same time, there could be love, and I think that's I think that's very Gemini, full moon to have this dichotomy, or this contrast between I love you and I hate you, and I like you and I don't like you, and I agree with you and I don't agree with you, and you're right and you're wrong, and like that's true and that's also not true, and like holding things at the same time that are a paradox, holding things at the same time that contradict each other, um, and loving each other anyways, finding what brings us together anyways. So overall, with this full moon, I see it as a very sleepy full moon. Like the energy is very lethargic and quiet and wintry and reflective and deep. And I just think there's something bigger going on for all of us. This isn't just a typical holiday. It's a holiday time of the year. It's not just a typical, I mean, we're on the brink of fundamental, fast and exponential change on the planet. And again, like we're in a space right now, with the sun in Sagittarius, where like on a broad view, that can be welcoming and exciting and interesting and overall for the better. And it could you could embrace a philosophy that can accept a lot of the not so good stuff happening right now on Earth. There can be an overview of things, and then there's Gemini, who's like really in the nitty gritty details, um, and just saying, but what about this person's experience? And what about that person's experience? And this person's experience, that person's experience? Like, this person's losing their job, this person is dying, and this person is suffering because of this, and this person has lost their rights, and this person is getting kicked out, and this person's doing that. And that's a part of the experience, and that's very real, and it's also not okay. So I think this full moon does highlight a balancing act with that, and the deep reflection that we all have to do on this change, that's happening. It's complex. It's very complex. And how do we approach it for ourselves individually? And so I want to leave you all with this, perspective, maybe, to help you reflect and kind of make something that feels very complex on a global scale a little bit more simplified for you. And that is that on a global scale, we're all going through this change together. And there is that global change of technology, of war, of disruption, of imbalances, of things collapsing and not going well. And um, we all are in that together. But it's just like when you go on a road trip or you go on vacation with a group of people, you're all going to the same destination. You're all going to, the beach, let's say, but each of you has your own experience. You know, there could be one person where they get sick, as on vacation, and they're still at the beach, but they feel miserable and they feel bad. Whereas someone else could, walk into a bar and fall in love and have like a beautiful love affair, and they have the best time ever. And another person could, have their kid, and it's more of a family experience. They all go to the beach, they all go on the same vacation, they all have different experiences. They all have very personal experiences. And I think this is something that we can embrace right now at this time is we're all going through major change on the planet. We're all going through, in some ways, a winter and a death and a grieving of some kind, both related to the global change as well as maybe even personal change that's happening in your life, or maybe it's just the natural ending of a cycle and the beginning of a new one for you, and that brings up grief. And yes, we're all in that experience together, but you have your personal experience, and this is where it gets more simple and less complex and more havable and more, um, hopefully clear for you, is to tune into your experience. What is your experience that you're here to have on Earth? Because you are the creator of your life. You are the one that's here having an experience, having a very personal experience. So, what is your experience? Just because the world is going through its dark night of the soul and its disruptions and chaos and changes and transformations and shifts and all kinds of things, what is your personal experience you came here to have? And some of you are questioning, like, I'm not even sure what that is, and I can sense that about you. And some people, I'm just going to throw out some examples here, but some of you are here to just elevate, your masculine and feminine energy and come into more union with your masculine and feminine energy, and to give your feminine energy more freedom to create, and more value in the way you create your life, and more authority in your decisions, more authority with your emotional intelligence, more authority with your intuition, more authority with what you choose to nurture and not nurture. Like, you're elevating both your masculine and feminine energy and coming into more union with yourself. And that can happen. Your personal experience can happen while women's rights are being taken away, while, you know, minorities are getting, treated horribly. Like, you can have an elevated personal experience while something is happening in mass consciousness that's opposite of that. It is possible. Okay? It can be that much of a contrast. We live on planet Earth, which is a full spectrum of experiences, and your experience can be a huge contrast to what's happening for everyone else. So I think it is a good time to reflect on that. What is your personal experience? Because you want to stay rooted in that, you want to stay grounded in that. Um, Otherwise, you can easily get scattered and mixed up in what's happening on the globe, and it can feel disorienting and overwhelming and disassociate. You could easily disassociate and have a hard time, going into states of paralysis and overwhelm, or other states, where you're just on edge all the time, anxious, or even just, triggered and reactive. Everyone responds differently. So that's what I wanted to leave you with is, why are you here? What is your experience? How is that different from the global experience? Because it is different from the global experience, especially if you are a conscious being here on earth. You're a bright, shiny light here on earth. You have gone through an awakening. You have gone beyond your awakening. You've um, embodied a lot of that light. Um, you're here for your individual purpose, your individual experience, and that can be different from the global experience. All right. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a enlightening full moon with Gemini. Okay, take care, everyone. Bye.